Hello, Parkside family, and anyone else who's tuning into our weekend services. Thank you for making this a part of your day. And I hope and I pray that our time together will be a blessing to you and also be a blessing to God. I want to start off our time together with reading a passage from Isaiah 40, familiar passage, but it helps me to draw strength from this during times that are challenging. And I feel like this is a challenging time, and even though there's a lot of positives, there's also some things that can kind of make us weary. So listen to these words that Isaiah penned. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the earth. He will not grow tired or weary, and his understanding no one can fathom. He gives strength to the weary and increases the power of the weak. Even youth grow tired and weary, young men stumble and fall. But those who put their hope in the Lord, they will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. In times like these, we need that hope. And that's why in the second week of our series, Beacon of Hope, we want you to tune in and listen to what Jesus said to those people many, many years ago about his ways being the best ways and bringing hope into a world that needs hope. Got a couple things I want to let you know about. First of all, next week, April 29th, on Wednesday, we're going to have another collection day for back-to-back ministries who are helping people in our community with needs. You can go on our website and check out exactly what to bring. But from 11 to 1, 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., you can bring those donations right here to the church, and we'll take care of those and get those to where they're needed. The second thing I really want to let you know is we know that these can be challenging times, and there may be those of you that are really benefiting from being together, and we know that there are challenges that are coming, and maybe this has been a struggle for you. We want to help you. Parkside has the resources to help you, but we need to know about that. So if you find yourself struggling, spiritually, emotionally, or even just financially or physically, please contact us. Let me know, randy@parksidechristian.com. We want to help you, and we want you to know that you are loved and you are appreciated, and that we can do whatever we can to help you. Please tune in to the rest of this, sing along, listen, take the time to reflect and pray, and we just pray and just hope that God will show up and give you what you need so that you can be ready for the days ahead, to know that there is hope and that Jesus is a beacon of hope. God bless you. Enjoy.
Let me out of the desert, run me into his streams, river of living water. Turn my bitter into sweet, all my burdens are lifted. Took the shackles off my feet. There's no sound louder than the captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. There is joy in the morning, springing up in my soul. There's a life worth living, he calls me his own. There's a hallelujah after sweet victory. There's no sound louder than the captive set free. No, there's no sound louder than the captive set free. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. You are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. You are my deliverer, you are my promised land. You are my deliverer, the freedom I'm living in. You are my deliverer, you are my promised land. So let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Sing of his promises evermore. Pour out your thankfulness, let it overflow. Let the redeemed of the Lord say so. Darkness tries to roll over my bones, but sorrow comes to steal the joy I own. When brokenness and pain is all I know, oh, I won't be shaken, no, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. Shame no longer has a place to hide. I'm not a captive to the lies. I'm not afraid to leave my past behind. Oh, I won't be shaken. No, I won't be shaken. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. There's power that can break off every chain. There's power that can empty out a grave. There's resurrection power that can save. There's power in your name. Power in your name. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. My fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love.
Jesus came to people who needed truth, transformation, and hope. He came and took their view of people, their values, and what's important and turned them upside down. He spoke with heaven on his lips and a truth that we may have hope. He came to be our beacon of hope.
Hey, good evening, everybody. What do you think? in this pretty nice setting out here on my deck. Nice evening, temperature's just right, no wind blowing. Beautiful lights. I got a good cup of coffee. I got some of Marilyn Stever's homemade molasses crinkle cookies. You're welcome to have one if you'd like to try one. Really good. Shouldn't talk with my mouth full, but you're about to hear the best sermon that's ever preached, ever. Really, in the history of the world. And the reason I can say that is because it's not my sermon. It's a sermon that Jesus preached. The most famous sermon that was ever spoken. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. So it's my privilege to try and do that justice. And we'll talk about a portion of it. So here we go. In the first century world and in Palestine where Jesus lived, it was a time that was very depressed. Economically, physically, and even spiritually, very depressed. Very dark time. And Jesus appeared as this beacon of hope. And he spoke with assurance that there is a God in heaven that loves us, and he can save us. He transforms us, and someday he's going to take us home with him. Yeah. But it's going to be on his terms. Absolutely, completely on his terms. And in the Sermon on the Mount, in Matthew's history, chapters 5, 6, and 7, he spells out what those terms are. And he says things that are really surprising. He kind of turns everything upside down according to what you would expect. He starts out that way. If you go back and listen to my sermon from last week, that's in the first part of what Jesus has to say. And he talks about what things are really good in life, how a person is really fortunate or really blessed, who the winners are, especially according to who God says the winners are. And the world says it's the wealthy, it's the rich. Those people are the winners. That's when you're really, really fortunate. And Jesus says, no, on the contrary, it's the poor. Actually, people who are poor in spirit, who are needy, who are desperate, especially if they're desperate for God, because theirs is the kingdom of God. Yeah, they belong to God in a heartbeat because they know how much they need him. That's different. He says, the world says the people that are fortunate are the powerful people because they can look around and see what they want and take what they want. Those are the people that are fortunate. And Jesus says, no, it's completely flipped on its head, different than that. It's people who are humble. It's people who are the givers and not the takers. They're the ones who find the really good stuff in life, the priceless stuff, the money they can't buy. And he goes on with that, turning everything on its head, saying, it's really what's good in this world and what's good according to what God says is good is what's going on inside of a person, what's happening in their heart and who they love and what they love. And that's what makes life what God always meant it to be and makes it the best that it can be. And so as Jesus comes into our life, and as we begin to embrace these things that he says are the best things and the way we should think and how we respond to situations that we're in, when we actually take him into ourselves, allow his spirit to come within us and to animate us and to compel us and to guide us, that's when we become very different and we stand out in stark contrast to the world that doesn't know God. And that contrast is a very good thing. And we begin to influence the world around us in a very good way because of that. And here's how Jesus describes the influence that we have when we take him into our lives and we start living according to his teachings and his truth and allow him to transform us from the inside out. He says, you followers of Jesus, you're salt of the earth. But if the salt has become tasteless, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled underfoot by men. Yeah, if salt has lost its salty quality. It's really not good for anything but to be gravel underfoot. It's always been an understanding, even in ancient times, that salt is a very valuable commodity. I found that out a few weeks ago when things started shutting down and you go to the grocery store and suddenly there are things you can't find anymore. And I was looking for a container of salt. Morton salt with a little girl with the umbrella on the front. We'd run out. Couldn't find it anywhere. Who would have guessed that salt would have become so valuable right now, or even so scarce? But people have understood for a long time, and even back in the time of Jesus, that salt has really valuable qualities. Salt is an antiseptic. Some people, if they get a sore throat, they gargle with salt water because salt kills bacteria. Well, people have always known that, or they've known it for a long time. And back before the days of refrigeration, if you wanted to preserve meat, you'd rub it with salt. You'd permeate the meat with salt, and it would ward off decay. You could keep meat for a long time because of its saltiness. So it has a preservative quality. It guards against corruption. The other thing the salt does is it makes things taste good. It enhances flavor. When I used to go stay on the farm with my aunt and uncle down in Grant County, Kentucky, we'd sit down at the dinner table, and my aunt was a great cook, but I would get ready with some bread and butter. I love bread and butter. And I'd lather up my bread with her butter and take a bite, and it never tasted right. It tasted funny. And I would find that if I could take a salt shaker and salt my bread and butter, it tasted the way it ought to taste, which seemed very weird to me that I would do that. But she didn't salt her butter. Salt made it taste so much better, and that's what salt does. It makes everything taste better. Well, Jesus says that's the quality that we carry. First of all, we bring the preserving truth of life into the world and even to the lives of the people around us. And we show them the way that life can be preserved for eternity, even beyond death. We survive on, we live on. We introduce them to the one who can make that happen in their lives. The other thing that we do as followers of Jesus, we do the same thing that Jesus did as far as permeating and making everything around us better than it would be. See, everything that's good is even better when Jesus is a part of the mix. And everything that's bad isn't quite so bad when Jesus is there. And that's how it is with us. When He transforms us from the inside out and we carry His qualities, we live in the way that He would live if He were here. And when His Spirit is actually really living inside of us, we have that same effect. Wherever we go, immediately everything around us is better. The neighborhood where we live is better because we're there as followers of Jesus. The place that we work, the school that we go to. The people's lives are better because we have this permeating, preserving, flavor-enhancing quality of life that we pass along to other people. What has to happen in order for that to happen, for us to have that kind of salty effect? Well, for salt to do anything, salt's got to get out of the shaker. And we can regard ourselves as salt shakers. Yeah, you got to get the salt out of the shaker. I guess we could say that we belong to a shaker church, kind of like back in frontier days here in America. We're a bunch of shakers, or we should be, to share those qualities with others before it has that effect in people's lives. Jesus says when that happens, as we live life in this very salty way, we light the place up, kind of like this. He says, "You salty people, you are the light of the world. A city set on a hill can't be hidden, nor does anyone light a lamp and put it under a basket. But no, you put it on the lampstand, and it gives light to everyone who's in the house. Let your light shine before men in such a way that they may see your good works and glorify your Father who is in heaven." So those salty qualities of life that come to us from Jesus have got to be shared. We need to get them out of the shaker into the world. And the church, followers of Jesus, have had a history of doing just that, being salty and bright, especially in dark times. And Rodney Stark has written a book called The Rise of Christianity. He's an American sociologist, and he tracks the reason that Christianity and the church had explosive growth in its earliest years in the Roman Empire, and especially during the darkest times, especially during times like this, during times of plagues and epidemics. Because when things were at their worst during plagues, that's when Christians were at their best. And people noticed that. He says that the reason that Christianity resonated with people, with, let's call it the pagan population of that time within Rome, the reason Christianity resonated was, well, there were three reasons. First of all, the Christians had a better explanation for what was going on when an epidemic hit. Secondly, they had a much better frame of mind in reaction to it. And thirdly, they had a very compassionate response as they moved into action, into the community around them. Now, in Roman times, the pagans had an explanation for why things like a plague or an epidemic would happen, and it was because the gods were mad at you. Somehow, you failed to make the right kind of a sacrifice, and you are being punished. You've got it coming, and here it is. So it was very fearful, and there wasn't much you could do about it. The Christians, on the other hand, said, no, it's not that way at all. These plagues are simply the random result of a world that's cursed, a world that's flawed. These kind of things happen, but we don't have to be helpless victims in the face of it, because there is a one and only loving God who's totally in control and who can sustain us and who can even take care of us, even if the very worst thing happens. Even if we die in this plague, we live on. In essence, we become bulletproof. And so the Christians had an explanation that was a better explanation for what was going on, and a much better mindset. They had this calmness, they had this confidence, they had this peace about them that no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. And so the only thing that the pagans could bring to an epidemic was doom and gloom and hopelessness. And what the Christians brought was confidence and optimism and hope even for eternity. And hope and optimism, that wins every time. And it did. Had a better explanation, had a greater confidence and a peaceful calm about them. And they had this wonderful response in the way that they began moving throughout their community in the midst of a plague. They said that because this one and only God loves us, not only does he love us, but he compels us to love you and to do things out of the ordinary, to do things that most people won't do, and that is to care about you. See, when an epidemic would come to the city, the pagans would run. They understood social distancing. They understood you're carrying death, and death will jump from you to me, so I need to stay away from you. And so they carried out the separation in a very cruel way. And this is recorded in history. If a family member got sick with the plague, they'd put them out in the street to fend for themselves. And even if they died, they let them lay there. Yeah, they didn't make a move to do anything with their loved one's body. Well, the Christians weren't like that. While most of the people were running from the plague, the wealthy people, they could get out of Dodge. They'd go out to their country estate until things blew over. Most people, most pagans, were running from the plague, but the Christians were running to the plague. There was a famous epidemic called the Plague of Cyprian. It was back in the 2nd century. And a bishop by the name of Dionysius recorded what the response of the Christians were during this. And here's how they reacted to this. He said, heedless of danger, they took charge of the sick, attending to their every need. And they did that. It didn't matter if somebody was a part of their Christian community or not. If you were a person and you were sick, they took care of you. That was impressive. Even in the 4th century, it seems like there was a monster plague about every century that it would come along. And in the 4th century, another plague hit the city of Rome. And the emperor at the time was Julian. They called him Julian the Apostate because he had been raised as a Christian. But he turned against his Christian faith and was turning back, wanted to turn the empire back to the Roman pantheon, to turn his citizens back to a worship of false gods. And he deeply resented the momentum of the Christian worldview and the way that the church was encroaching on the empire. And so he was standing against that and calling his people back to paganism. But he wasn't gaining any ground because of those pesky Christians. And when the plague hit, he was just so frustrated. And here's what he wrote, especially about the Christians. He said, atheism, and when he talks about atheism, he's talking about Christianity because he considered Christians to be atheists because they didn't believe in the Roman gods. He says, atheism has been specially advanced through the loving service rendered to strangers and through their care for the burial of the dead. It is a scandal that the godless Galileans, that's what he called Christians, godless Galileans, they care not only for their own poor, but for ours as well, while those who belong to us look in vain for the help that we should render them. And so the pagans and pagan religion were quickly losing credibility in comparison to the compassion of the Christians. Julian couldn't even motivate his own priest to do anything in response to the plague that was compassionate in any way. So people were flocking to join these Christians in this wonderful community who followed this God who would love them. They'd never heard of a God who would love you and that you could love in return and who would have any interest or involvement in your life. None of their gods were like that. But here's this God who not only cares about you, but then motivates his followers to do these wonderful things and gives you the confidence that no matter what happens, good or bad, no matter what happens, it's all going to be okay because God's in control. And if it doesn't happen in this life, it's going to happen in the next life. But you live on. That's very attractive. And the ancient historian Eusebius wrote about Christians during times of plague and epidemics. And he says, because of their compassion in the midst of the plagues, the Christians' deeds were on everyone's lips. And they, the pagans, glorified the God of the Christians. Isn't that what Jesus said? Let your deeds shine before men so that they glorify your Father in heaven. That is exactly what was happening. So this makes me think immediately of what's going on right now with COVID-19. Now, we're being told to separate, to shelter at home, and we're doing that. And that's a very smart thing to do, isn't it? Because it works. It's common sense that if you're sick and I stay away from you, I'm not going to get what you have, and we're going to flatten the curve, and we are, of infections and of sickness. It's coming down if we keep doing what we're being asked to do, and so we will. It's a reasonable thing to ask of us. But even so, as we're separating ourselves from each other, there are still people who are running to the plague. Nurses in clinics and hospitals, and doctors, technicians, paramedics, EMTs, firefighters, policemen, all of these people are running to the plague, running to care for the people who need help and people who are very sick, even with this virus. Now we might say, well, of course they're doing that because if they want to keep their job, they have to do that. Well, yeah, that's true to an extent. But those people are in those jobs in the first place because that's how they're wired up. They do those things as a career because they care about people. And God bless you, nurses and doctors and technicians and police and EMTs and on. God bless you and thank you for what you're doing and taking care of us and running to the plague. Even people in grocery stores and some of the other essential businesses that are continuing, thank you for what you're doing. Thank you for your willingness to put yourself at risk for us so we could have some of the basic necessities to get through this thing. Even those who have complied and you've had to shut down your business, and I'm not saying you've done that joyfully or willfully, that's a very painful thing that you've done. But thank you for that. You're helping to keep us all safe in what you've done. And I pray for you. And what you have done has not gone unappreciated. We don't take that for granted, and we understand the sacrifice that you're making. And I pray to God, God, please compensate these people and bring prosperity back into their lives in light of what they've done and the price that they've had to pay for the sake of all of us. So where does this spirit of nobility come from? These good people, times past and even in the present now, where they're willing to run into harm's way for the sake of other people. Where does that come from? Well, not everybody who is in these helping professions is a follower of Jesus. Some of them are just really good-hearted, loving people. But whether they acknowledge Jesus in their lives or not, whether they know it or not, they are following the example of Jesus, the example that he set. That's what we do. And especially the people that are part of Parkside, part of our Parkside family. And I counted up as best I could. There are 21 different people who are nurses and doctors in all these helping, first responding categories that I listed. 21 people from Parkside who are in those professions. And I've got their names listed, and I hesitate to read their names because I might leave somebody out. I want you to know I've been praying for you by name. Did that before I'm speaking this sermon this evening. But they do understand what this example is, and that's an example that they carry in their heart. That is their heart. Jesus is real and alive within them. He's their heartbeat. And they might say, without me putting words in their mouth, they might say, it's just how we're wired up. It's who we are. As followers of Jesus, it's what we do. So, we're told in Scripture that we should always be ready to give a reason for the hope that we carry as Christian people. When's the last time somebody asked you about the hope that you have as a Christian? And if they haven't asked you, why haven't they? Well, they're not going to ask you as long as you are hoping in the same stuff that they're hoping in, and as long as you are reacting to situations, and especially a situation like this one, as long as you're reacting in the same way that they're reacting, they're not going to see much difference. There's nothing to ask about. But when they see that salty brightness within our lives, when they understand that we have a different explanation for what's going on, and we have a different mindset toward it, that we're not full of doom and gloom and panic and hopelessness, that all is lost, but instead they see that calm, quiet confidence and even good humor. And I'm not talking about a dismissal of what's going on, or a denial of the reality of it, or turning away from the pain and pretending that that isn't there. I'm not talking about that at all. Yes, we feel the pain of this like everybody else does, but this deep down understanding that it's going to be okay, because we've got an advocate in a loving God who's watching over us, and when the bad things strike, he's going to comfort us, and he could just turn things around in ways that we don't expect, but we're going to be okay. That's different, and that's what we need to be communicating to the people around us. Hope, optimism, confidence. That's what people are desperate for right now. It's how we think as followers of Christ. And then we respond. Now, we're limited in some ways as to how we can be a blessing to other people, and the best thing we can do right now is to stay away from each other, to let this thing run its course. But even so, there are creative ways that we can look around and find a means to be a blessing in people's lives, to encourage them to meet physical needs as we can. And we're offering those opportunities even as Parkside, things that you can step into, and you're creative enough to come up with your own ideas as to how you can be a blessing to your neighbors, even in the shelter of your own home. It's what we do. It's how we think, and it's what we do as salty, bright followers of Jesus. And when that happens, and when we are careful to give Jesus the credit for that it's because of him that we think and do what we do, that's when people say, okay, so you seem to have a treasure that's different than mine? Tell me about your treasure. I'm intrigued. You seem to have a hope that I don't have. I'd like to know about yours. Tell me about that. That's when we've got the opportunity to introduce them to the one who makes all the difference in life, to the one who is the beacon of hope in the darkest of times. He's the beacon of hope now, and a hope that carries us on into eternity. Yeah, we reflect the light of Jesus. And as people come to us and say, you're different, and I want to know why, that's when we direct them to the one and say, I'm different because He, Jesus Christ, is a part of my life. And He makes all the difference in life. And as we do that, as we do these deeds that shine in the world, and as we give credit to God, to Christ, as we do them, even today, people will give glory to the God of the Christians, just as they have always done through all the ages that Christ followers have been permeating the world around them here on earth. The very worst plague that ever hit the world is an ongoing epidemic, and it's still going to be here when COVID-19 has run its course. And of course, I'm talking about the soul-killing infection of sin and a turning away from God. It's devastating, it's infectious, and it's fatal. And we're helpless in the face of it, and there's no known cure for it. And so what do we do about it? Well, we can't do anything about it. But somebody did. Because God stepped into our world, and as everybody else was cowering in fear, saying, woe is us, what are we going to do? We are in a terrible, sinful dilemma. We are our own worst enemies. What are we going to do? God came in, and as we were running from the plague, cowering from the plague in fear, God ran to the plague. Jesus ran to the plague. He said, I know what it takes. I'm going to do what it takes to bring this plague to an end within mankind. I'm going to offer myself in sacrifice. I'm going to offer the perfect sacrifice that is the cure. It's the ultimate solution to our human sinful dilemma. And that's exactly what He did. Jesus ran to the plague. And so there are things that we can do to respond to a physical plague, a virus that has come through and is complicating our lives in devastating ways. But there's also something that we can do about this ongoing epidemic of sin. We're the antidote. We are the antidote that Christ has in a sin-sick world right now that is the cure for sin. We're not the cure, but we can direct people to who is the cure. And the cure is Jesus Christ. He's the only solution, but He's the complete and total solution. And the best thing that we can do for the people around us as we are salty and bright is to say, Jesus is the one you need, and Jesus is the one who can make the eternal difference in your life. And He can save you from the dilemma that we find ourselves in and give you hope and assured hope and give you confidence and give you peace of mind and all the things that we're craving right now and on into eternity. So let's do what Jesus did and what He tells us to do. Run to the plague. Let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and see Jesus. Let's do it, Parkside. Have a good evening.
Every secret, every shame, every fear, every pain, live inside the door. That's not who we are. We are children of the day. So wake up, sleeper, lift your head. light shine. We are the light of the world. We are a city on a hill. We are the light of the world. And we gotta let the light shine. We are called to spread the news, tell the world the simple truth. Jesus came to save, there's freedom in his name, so let it all break through. We are the light of the world. We are a city on a hill. We are the light of the world. We gotta let the light shine. We are the light of the world. We are a city on a hill. We are the light of the world. We gotta let the light shine. We are the light, we are the light, we are the light. Let your light shine brighter. We are the light, we are the light, we are the light. Jesus, you are the light, you are the light, you are the light. We will lift you high and shine, shine, shine. We are the light of the world. We are a city on a hill. We are the light of the world. We gotta let the light shine. We are the light of the world. We are a city on a hill. We are the light of the world. We gotta let the light shine. Let the light shine, let the light shine.
We're going to take a few moments right now to complete our time of worship, at least in this setting, to spend time in fellowship with Jesus. We call it communion. And it's when we take some bread and we take some juice and we remember that sacrifice that Jesus made as he ran to the plague, as he offered himself, bodily offered himself physically as a perfect sacrifice to satisfy the justice, to experience the wrath of God, so that we could be forgiven of our sins, so we wouldn't have to satisfy or endure any of that. And here's a wonderful scripture that describes that. It says, "For while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly." That's us. "For one will hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for the good man someone would dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love toward us in that while we were yet sinners, while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." And so because of that, Jesus turns and he says to us, and these are his words, he says, "This is my commandment, love each other in this same way, in the same way that I have loved you. There is no greater love than to lay down one's life for one's friends." So let's thank Christ for that sacrifice, and let's ask him to help us to live in that very same way among the people around us, to spread his love and to tell of the wonder of what he's done for us as we enter into this time of communion.